My dad looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Lauren, you've always been the strong one. You'll figure it out." My mom nodded, like he'd just said something wise. Like he hadn't just told me, without a single flinch, that my needs didn't matter, that I never had. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter and started being their consequence. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with that meeting. It starts about 6 years earlier, when I was 26 years old, sitting at my parents' kitchen table with a laptop, a cup of cold coffee, and the quiet, desperate hope that if I just helped enough, they'd finally see me. My name is Lauren. I'm 32 now. I work as a CPA at a mid-size accounting firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have my own apartment, my own car, and as of 8 months ago, my own boundaries. But getting here cost me more than I can put into a number, and I'm an accountant, so that's saying something. My brother Derek is 4 years older than me. He's 36, and for as long as I can remember, he has been the sun that my parents orbit. Everything in our house revolved around Derek, his moods, his plans, his potential. My parents talked about him the way people talk about a gifted child who just hasn't been discovered yet. They were always waiting for him to bloom. Meanwhile, I was just there. Steady. Reliable. Easy. I was the one who got straight A's without anyone asking. The one who got a scholarship so my parents wouldn't have to stress about tuition. The one who never called at midnight with a crisis, never needed anyone to co-sign a loan, never showed up on a holiday with a new disaster in tow. I thought being low maintenance was a virtue. I didn't realize it just made me invisible. Derek, on the other hand, had a talent for catastrophe. At 22, he borrowed $5,000 from my parents to invest in a friend's food truck business. The food truck lasted 3 months. At 25, he convinced my dad to co-sign on a lease for an apartment he couldn't afford, and my dad had to cover 2 months of rent when Derek lost yet another job. At 28, he got into a car accident, his fault, uninsured, and my parents quietly paid out $11,000 to settle it before it became a lawsuit. Every single time, my parents found the money. Every single time, there were no questions asked, no lectures given, no conditions attached. Derek would sit at that same kitchen table where I used to do my homework, look appropriately sheepish for about 45 seconds, and my mom would pat his hand and say, "It's okay, sweetheart. We'll get through this together." Together. I used to wonder what that word meant in our family, because it never seemed to include me. When I was 26, my dad's small landscaping business started struggling. He had built it from nothing over 20 years, and he was proud of it, rightfully so. But he was 61, not great with technology, and the administrative side of things was slowly burying him. He was using paper invoices, a handwritten ledger, and a scheduling system that was essentially a whiteboard with sticky notes. I offered to help. I want to be clear about that. I offered. Nobody asked me. I came in one weekend and spent 2 full days setting up QuickBooks, digitizing 3 years of financial records, and creating a system for invoicing and payroll that any person with basic computer skills could manage. My dad looked at what I had done, and he teared up. Actually teared up. He said, "Lauren, I don't know what I would do without you." I should have felt the warning in that sentence. Instead, I felt loved. So I kept coming back. At first, it was once a month, just to check the books and make sure everything was running smoothly. Then it became twice a month. Then it became every weekend, because Derek, who had been nominally helping with the business, kept creating messes that I had to fix. He'd forget to send invoices, he'd enter numbers wrong. He'd promise clients discounts that my dad had never approved. Once, he accidentally deleted an entire month of payroll records, and I spent a Saturday reconstructing everything from bank statements and paper receipts. I never asked for a single dollar. My dad would occasionally say, "I'll make it up to you," and I'd wave it off and say, "Family doesn't need to make things up to each other." I meant it. I genuinely meant it. I was raised to believe that family shows up, and I was showing up the only way I knew how. What I didn't fully see, because I was too close to it, was that I was the only one showing up. Derek was collecting a salary from the business, not a huge one, but a real one, deposited every 2 weeks for work that was, At best, inconsistent, and at worst, actively harmful. I was contributing more than he was, and earning nothing. And my parents, who loved me, who I know loved me, never once suggested that this wasn't fair. The first crack appeared 2 years into this arrangement. My dad's business had stabilized. More than stabilized, it was doing well. He'd picked up 2 commercial contracts because I'd helped him put together a professional proposal package. His revenue was up 30% from where it had been when I first stepped in. He was talking about expanding, maybe hiring 2 more crew members in the spring. Around the same time, Derek announced that he wanted to get serious about his life. He'd been dating a woman named Cassie for about 8 months, and he wanted to propose. He wanted to buy a house. He wanted to start fresh. My parents were over the moon. My mom started talking about grandchildren within the same conversation. Derek, of course, had no savings. He had never had savings. He'd been living paycheck to paycheck off the business salary, while my parents covered any shortfalls. So when he said he wanted to buy a house, what he meant was, he needed a down payment that he didn't have. My parents gave him $42,000. I found out at Christmas dinner, 6 weeks after the fact. My mom mentioned it casually, the way you mention picking up someone's dry cleaning. "Oh, we helped Derek and Cassie with the down payment on the new place. Did we tell you?" She hadn't told me. I looked at my dad. He looked at his mashed potatoes. I didn't say anything that night. I smiled, said I was happy for Derek, helped clear the dishes, and drove home in silence. But I sat with it. $42,000. That was more than my annual salary when I first started at the firm. It was more than my parents had spent on my entire college education, including the years before my scholarship kicked in. And it was given without hesitation, without condition, to someone who had spent a decade demonstrating that he could not be trusted with money. I told myself it was their money, and their choice. I told myself I didn't need their help, because I was doing fine. I told myself a lot of things that year. Then I got the diagnosis. I was 29 when I started having pain in my right hip. Not dramatic. At first just an ache that got worse when I sat for long periods, which, as an accountant during tax season, is basically always. I ignored it for longer than I should have. When I finally went to a doctor, then an orthopedic specialist, then an MRI, the answer came back as femoroacetabular impingement. Bone growth in the wrong place, grinding against the socket with every step. The specialist told me it had probably been developing for years. He told me I needed surgery, a hip arthroscopy, to correct it before it caused permanent cartilage damage. He also told me the cost. My insurance at the time was through a freelance gap period. I had just switched jobs and was between employer plans on a temporary individual policy with a high deductible. The surgery, after what my insurance would cover, was going to cost me approximately $19,000 out of pocket. I had been saving aggressively for 2 years to put a down payment on a condo. I'd been eyeing a place that was finally going to be mine, not rented. Mine, and I had managed to set aside $23,000. If I used my savings for the surgery, the condo was gone. If I waited on the surgery, the specialist was clear. I was risking irreversible joint damage. I was 29. I could not afford to gamble with my hip at 29. I spent 2 weeks going back and forth. I looked at medical financing options. I looked at payment plans. I ran the numbers 17 different ways, because that's what I do when I'm scared. I run the numbers. None of them worked without leaving me in debt that would take years to dig out of, or without delaying the surgery longer than was medically advisable. And then I thought about my parents. I thought about $42,000 for a down payment, no questions asked. I thought about $11,000 for a car accident. I thought about $5,000 for a food truck that lasted 3 months. I thought about 6 years of free labor. I called my mom and asked if we could have a family dinner, just the 4 of us. I said I needed to talk to them about something. She said of course. Sunday at 6, she'd make pot roast. I rehearsed what I would say for the entire week. I was calm when I drove over. I was calm when I sat down. I waited until after dinner, until the plates were cleared and there was coffee on the table, and then I told them everything. The diagnosis, the surgery, the cost, the timing. I laid it out the way I would lay out a financial report, clear, organized, no drama. Then I asked if they could help me with the out-of-pocket costs. Not all of it. I said even 10 or 12,000 would let me keep enough savings to handle recovery time and still have a cushion. I said I would pay them back. I had a repayment plan written out. I actually brought a printed sheet with a repayment schedule. Because I am Lauren, and that is exactly the kind of thing I do. My dad looked at the sheet. Then he looked at my mom. Something passed between them, one of those silent conversations that parents have when they've already talked about something and just need to confirm they're still on the same page. Then my dad looked at me and said, "Lauren, you've always been the strong one. You'll figure it out." I stared at him. My mom reached across the table and touched my hand, the same way she used to touch Derek's hand, and said, "We just don't have the liquidity right now, sweetheart." The business had a slow quarter. The business that I had rebuilt. The business whose books I had been maintaining for free for 6 years. The business that was up 30% in revenue because of systems I had designed on my weekends, while they paid Derek a salary for losing invoices. I said, "What about what you gave Derek for the down payment?" My dad said that was different, that Derek had a family to think about now, a wife, a future. He said it like I didn't have a future, like my future in my hip and my ability to walk without pain was a minor inconvenience compared to my brother's need for granite countertops. I said, "If the surgery doesn't happen soon, I could have permanent joint damage." My dad said, "You're strong, Lauren. You've always handled things." My mom said, "Maybe look into a payment plan?" I nodded. I picked up my printed repayment schedule from the table, folded it in half, and put it in my purse. I said goodnight. I drove home. And somewhere between their driveway and my apartment, I made a decision. I was done. Not dramatically. Not with a phone call full of accusations or a letter full of grievances. Just done. Quietly, completely, and with the same competence I had brought to every other thing in my life. The first thing I did was schedule the surgery. I used my savings. Yes, it meant the condo was on hold. Yes, it meant I would be financially tight for the next 18 months. I didn't care. I was not going to let my hip deteriorate while I waited for my family to decide I was worth helping. The second thing I did was send my dad an email. Professional, clear, no anger. I told him that due to my medical situation and recovery period, I would no longer be able to assist with the bookkeeping and financial administration for the business. I thanked him for the opportunity to help over the years. I told him I hoped the business continued to thrive. I gave him 2 weeks' notice, because I am Lauren, and even when I'm walking away, I give 2 weeks' notice. I did not mention Sunday dinner. I did not mention the $42,000. I did not mention the repayment schedule I had brought in my purse. I just stopped. I had my surgery 3 weeks later. My recovery was 6 weeks of limited mobility, working from home, a lot of physical therapy, and meals I had to prep in advance because I couldn't stand for long periods. 2 friends from work checked in on me regularly. A neighbor picked up groceries twice. My family did not call once during that 6 weeks. Not once. I found out later through a cousin who didn't realize she was telling me something I didn't know, that Derek had stepped up to handle the books after I stepped away. Derek, who once deleted an entire month of payroll records. Derek, who sent invoices to the wrong clients so consistently that my dad eventually had to call each one personally to apologize. Apparently it was not going well. About 2 months after my surgery, when I was back on my feet and back in the office, my phone rang on a Thursday evening. My mom. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message saying she just wanted to check in, that she hoped I was feeling better, that she'd love to get together soon. I texted back, "Doing well, thanks." A week later, my dad called. I answered that one. He asked how I was. I said fine. He said the business was going through a rough patch. He said Derek was doing his best, but the administrative side was giving him some trouble. He paused, and in that pause I could hear exactly where the conversation was going. The way you can see a wave before it reaches you. He said, "We were wondering if maybe you had some time to come by and just take a look at things, just to get us back on track." I said, "I'm not available for that." He said, Lauren, I said, I had surgery, Dad. I needed help, and you told me to figure it out. So I did. And now I have. Silence. Then he said, very quietly, that's not fair. And I said, just as quietly, no, it wasn't. I hung up. My mom called 3 days later, and this time I answered. She was crying before she even finished saying my name. She said the business was in real trouble. She said Derek had accidentally voided a commercial contract by missing a billing deadline, one of the 2 contracts I had helped my dad win in the first place. She said they were scared. She said they needed me. I listened to all of it. I let her say everything she needed to say. And when she was finished, I said, Mom, I love you, but I'm not coming back to fix this. She said, Lauren, please, we're your family. I said, I know. And when I was your family and I needed surgery and I asked for help, Dad told me I was strong and I'd figure it out. And you nodded. So I'm going to give you the same answer you gave me. You're strong. You'll figure it out. She stopped crying. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. Then she said, how could you do this to us? And I said, I'm not doing anything to you, Mom. I'm just not doing it for you anymore. I ended the call. I sat on my couch for a long time after that. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. This is not a story where the ending feels like fireworks. It felt more like setting down something very heavy that I had been carrying for so long. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have empty hands. I went to physical therapy the next morning. I walked in without a limp for the first time in 2 years. My therapist said my recovery was ahead of schedule. Over the next several months, I learned things about myself that I had been too busy and too needed to see before. I learned that I am actually quite good at resting. I learned that I like cooking for just myself, without the anxiety of what family event I needed to be ready for. I learned that the condo I had been putting off was still available, a different unit in the same building, slightly better view, and that with focused saving over the following 14 months, it would be mine. I stayed in limited contact with my parents. Holidays, sometimes. Brief phone calls. Enough to know they were okay, not enough to be pulled back into the same current. Derek got divorced from Cassie 18 months after the wedding, which nobody in the family talked about directly, just sort of absorbed in silence the way families absorb things that don't fit the story they've decided to tell about themselves. The business survived. My dad eventually hired a part-time bookkeeper, an actual professional, who charged him $110 an hour for the same work I had been doing for free. I found out from my cousin, and I felt nothing except a quiet, clear thought. That's what it was worth. My condo closed on a Tuesday in March. I stood in the empty living room the first night. Just me, and a sleeping bag and a bottle of wine I'd been saving, and I thought about the version of myself that used to sit at my parents' kitchen table and believe that helping enough would eventually be enough to be chosen. I thought about my dad's face when he said, "You've always been the strong one." He wasn't wrong. I am strong. I just finally decided to use that strength for myself. There's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Something I want to say directly to anyone who is watching this and recognizing their own life in this story. People will call you strong the way they call a table sturdy as a reason to keep putting weight on you, not as a compliment. They will admire your ability to carry things right up until the moment you stop carrying them, and then they will call it abandonment. They will say you changed. They will say you're not the person they knew. They're right. You're not. You're the person who finally understood that being needed is not the same as being loved. That showing up for everyone except yourself is not a virtue. It's a slow, disappearing act. That the people who love you, truly love you, do not reach for you only when they need something fixed. I still love my parents. That part is complicated and real and doesn't have a clean resolution. But I love myself more than I fear their disappointment. And that is a sentence it took me 31 years to be able to say and mean. My hip is fine, by the way. Completely healed. I walk into work every morning without pain. And that alone was worth every single thing it cost me to get here. If this story hit close to home, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been the strong one in your family? At what point did you realize that strength was being used against you? I read every single comment. And sometimes your words remind me that this community is the realest thing about what we do here. I'm Lauren. This is Revenge Fire, and I'll see you in the next one.